And I know there's been some discourse about, will James Bond ever be gay? My obsession is that the actor, I would love to see a day where the actor playing James Bond is an out gay person. They said the King's Speech, we went up to do the speech. I gave the speech first, and I said, I want to thank my boyfriend Ben, and I felt the gasp in the crowd.
Iain, thank you so much for joining me.
Good to be here.
I'm so excited to talk to you about film because I love chatting about film and TV.
Okay.
The Academy Awards, you've been how many times now?
3 times. Yeah, we've been 3 times, nominated 3 times.
Amazing. And
Yeah.
what's it like?
Well, it's a bit crazy because the first time we went, we were lucky enough to win, and I was crazy. Like looking back on it now, and I often think about this: would this be different if I was older? Because I was 31 at the time when we won, and me and my business partner Emil just were sort of caught up in this. Like the King's Speech became. I was producing Shame in New York at the time when all the King's Speech stuff was sort of kicking off, and my now husband, then boyfriend, was in London and was saying, "Oh, you just don't understand what's going on with this film. There's people around the block waiting for the screening time." It was a complete phenomenon, and our first film together, me and Emil's, and then we went there, and normally the thing that some people don't quite understand about certainly the Oscars is that there's so many precursor award ceremonies that it sort of narrows down to like 1 or 2 people are going to win on the night. So it doesn't really, I think whoever you are, if you're one of the 5 or one of the 10 people nominated in whatever category, you're always thinking maybe, but normally there's a good indication that you aren't or you are going to win.
Right.
So it's normally down to a couple of people. So, but we weren't really aware of all of that at the time. We sort of didn't quite know that was the case. And so when Steven Spielberg said the King's Speech, it was like my whole brain sort of imploded. And then it's one of the most out of body experiences I've ever had. And then I said, me and my husband, then boyfriend at the time, were that morning going, okay, if I win, what do I call you? Like in the context of the speech, like how do I address you?
Yeah.
And it's always been a kind of thing where people have said partner, or no one had said any sort of real gendered name at that point. And so I said, well, I can't remember, maybe Ben said, he said, well, I'm your boyfriend. Why don't you just say, you want to thank your boyfriend? I said, okay, sure, I'll thank my boyfriend. Plus, my business partner is Emil. So partner means something different in the context of how my business works.
Yeah.
So they said the King's Speech. We went up to do the speech. I gave the speech first. And I said, I want to thank my boyfriend, Ben. And I felt the gasp in the crowd because I was the first person on the televised, version of the show. I think Adam Elliott, who is a director I've worked with, had thanked his boyfriend, but it had been part of the kind of the sort of montage reel because it was short film he had won for. But in the main telecast, I was, I think, the first person to say boyfriend, and then that became a bit of a thing. So when I was sort of went back to New York, well, I thought winning an Oscar and being on stage would be the sort of gayest sort of moment of my life. But then as I went off stage, they said, no, we need to bring you all the winners are going back on stage to do Somewhere Over the Rainbow.
Oh my God.
As some sort of like end montage. I was like, oh no, this is actually probably going to be the gayest thing.
Yeah.
So we went off, and then it was sort of slightly strange because I'd be in New York making Shame, and we would go out for drinks or whatever to a bar, and people would come up and go, you did a thing. And it was really just, it was political in a sense because I wanted to sort of have that moment to thank the person who'd been supporting me so much. But I didn't quite realize that then I would be sort of congratulated on a sort of bigger
Yeah.
community way. But it was incredible. And since then, things have really shifted.
That blows my mind that you sensed a gasp in the room.
Yeah.
Like it just wouldn't happen now.
It
Like,
wouldn't happen now.
it's
No.
crazy, that shift in energy that you felt from a room full of creatives who you
Yeah.
expect to be completely like liberal and open.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe it was all in my own head, but I definitely felt, like it was a moment that was, I guess it was a first, and I think it was because, I don't think there would have been the kind of, not fuss, but there wouldn't have been the kind of reaction to it if it hadn't been something.
Yeah. And for Steven Spielberg to be the man himself that gives you the Oscar, that is just, when you said that you felt like you were in like an out of body experience, to walk up stage, walking past Meryl Streep or whoever was in the room, to then go get an Oscar off Steven Spielberg. I mean, I've seen the photo of you guys in your living room, and it's just, it couldn't be better, right?
No, that was surreal. And then the strange thing is, you go backstage and then you're sort of stood in a sort of, you're waiting to go through to the press section. And I was like, we're stood with Steven Spielberg. Shouldn't we be pitching him something or try to think? And then you're in your own space. But that was, I mean, to be given that award, which is a sort of award about your peers, or they weren't really my peers at that point because I was just sort of starting, but like the people I admired and respected so much, to get an award that was voted by them and then meet the person that had made, your significant, consistent cinema trips for your life. I remember going to a birthday party for Jurassic Park, watching E.T. as a kid. So
what did you say to him off camera? Did you steal a moment of any kind?
We told him how much we loved his work, which I'm sure he hears all the time from everybody. But he was very, he had liked the film and was very kind about that. And so, and then we were sort of whisked off to have about 100 light bulbs go off in front of our faces, which was pretty surreal, because producers, you're not really, you feel like the people in the line taking photos are sort of just checking their battery.
Yeah.
When they're taking photos of the producers, that's the thing. But that in that moment, it definitely felt, I don't know, like that photo meant something, because it was Best Picture.
And did you celebrate that evening?
Yeah, I sort of, I'm not a great film party person normally. So we sort of went to, the Chateau Marmont where we were staying, and I then had to get up the next morning actually and go back to New York to shoot. It was the I don't know whether you've seen Shame, but there's a sequence where Michael Fassbender goes into the Eagle in New York and sort of walks through it, and then we cut to another location. But so I sort of ended up winning, going to bed relatively late, but not ridiculously late, getting a lot of room service.
Yeah.
And then waking up next evening, we were filming, with 500 bears in the Eagle, having Michael Fassbender slip through, and I was like, this is good. I'm back to work.
Yeah.
Back to work.
So I haven't seen the movie Shame, but I have seen some of Shame.
Right. Okay.
Do you know what I'm referring to?
Possibly. You're talking about the incredible performances.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your getting to that point. So obviously you've done lots more since that moment, but to get to that point at 31, what was your career? What was your trajectory? For anybody listening to this who wants to get into film, obviously it's a different landscape now, but what was your path into that moment?
I just didn't think I was ever going to do the job that I do. And now I sort of run a company of 45 people plus. And I just never thought. I grew up in Bristol. I went to university in Cardiff. I did not think I was... basically, there was 2 TV shows that were significant in Bristol at the time. I think it was Only Fools and Horses and Casualty. And I was like obsessed about getting to be a runner on one of those productions. And I thought that would be incredible. And that would have been incredible. And keeping a sort of long story short, I went to be to interview to be a runner / assistant for a short film producer in Bristol. And at the end of the interview, he said, "Great, you let's do it." And he said, "If you could pick me up tomorrow and we'll go on location scout." I was like, "Oh, I don't drive." And he was like, "Oh, well, I do need someone who drives." And I was like, "Okay."
Be like, I'll get a car.
Oh no, I don't know. There was something I actually learned to drive during the pandemic as like a thing to do. But then he said, "But my girlfriend works in London in a production company in Soho, and they're looking for a runner. And let me give her a call and see, would you move to London?" And it was like, I was in the closet then. As a gay kid, I was like, oh my God, this could be incredible. Like, this could be my start of my journey to become who I really was. And he said, "No, they've just given the job away this morning." And I was like, oh God. And then the following Monday, when that person was meant to start, they didn't show up. That person didn't show up. And so I got a call from this producer's girlfriend, who's now a producer in her own right, and said, "Would you be able to come up for an interview and start pretty immediately?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely, I'll do that." And so if that person had shown up that day, I would not, well, I hopefully would have had some form of career, but I wouldn't have had exactly the career that I've had. It was a real sliding doors moment.
Yeah. And
then I sort of just worked my way up, but it was definitely at that point, and probably still a little bit too much now, the onus was on, if you can finance, like, I just put lots on credit cards. I still had a bit of student loans left over. It was such appalling pay. I was just going into debt to get the kind of skill set, I guess, to move on. And then long story short, I ended up becoming an executive producer, and I worked on two British independent films. One was Anton Corbijn's Control, and the other was Steve McQueen's Hunger. And I helped raise the finance for that, and was involved in that process. And then from that, I knew Emil, my business partner now, from Australia. And we thought, without really knowing each other massively well, let's just give this a go and see if we can build a production company together. And it was partly because Control and Hunger, I think, captured a particular moment of, I guess, a new style of British independent features. And then they both went to Cannes, those films. And I remember being in the lift for Control in the cinema complex in Cannes, and no one knew who I was. And I remember someone involved with somebody in the film said, "Well, this is going to be the worst film we've ever seen." And I was like, "I really hope it isn't."
Oh God.
But I felt in that room when Control became something.
Yeah.
And this is a while back now. I thought my life changed in that moment.
And the winning of the Academy Award, if we bring it back to that moment, does that again change your life? So you're saying Control changed your life in one way, and sort of like, this is me in the industry, like the name is out there now.
Yeah.
Would you argue winning an Oscar significantly changes the game in terms of how people see you in the industry?
Yeah, massively. It really does, but only in terms of what you do next. I think, honestly. I mean, obviously there is I remember going to meet producer Jeremy Thomas, who won an Oscar for one of his films, and he was like, and he's been a mentor for me a little bit. So he was like, you're in a club. This is a very small club. It's like, oh, this is very exciting to be in this club.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, it changes. I mean, I remember we went around LA and we were like, we'd won, and we did all the big meetings, all the big people, and you just felt like every year there's a 3 or 4 people that do that tour. But it's how you then build from that that really, I don't know, makes people realize that you're consistent at making work that people want to be involved in.
There's a lot of chat around remaking old classics and bringing them into modern day. Disney's a great example of this. They're remaking everything now as live action and kind of changing the original story.
Yeah.
I'm interested in your opinion on, let's take, I'm trying to think, Little Mermaid. That made like a big hoo-ha in the press because it was a black Little Mermaid. So then you get like people being like, why are they messing with the story? All this sort of thing, you know, like she was white, make a new Little Mermaid like entirely. And then obviously loads of people are like, why do you give a shit? It's a fantasy, you know, let's modernize this. What's your opinion on that sort of like remodeling of stories from the past and bringing them into modern day?
It is interesting. And I think you've got two things that I think are really important, which is you have to acknowledge that the fan base is important and special. And also you have to combine that with bringing new audiences to something so that it can be their special film. And it doesn't feel like it's it's too inside baseball and they don't know why they're falling in love with it. So I think, finding new audiences and keeping fans happy is a delicate balance. But if you get that right, it's going to be really amazing.
I heard a quote which I really thought was interesting. Why are they remaking old films that did really well? Why not just come up with completely new stories? Like, are we that desperate for creative that we're basically just regurgitating what's already been because studios are like, that did well, let's just do it again?
Sure, but there's amazing stuff that comes out of that. Like there's always some, you know, Star is Born. Look at that. There's been 3 versions of that. And I think there's a version of that type of a dynamic, like a major love story with sort of potential tragedy. You had the Barbara Streisand version, you had the Judy Garland one, and then you had Lady Gaga. But then in the years before, you had The Bodyguard in the middle. So I don't know. There's something about what certain stories do to audiences that is hard to deny. You shouldn't give the next generation that feeling too.
I think when a film is perfect, though, in its time, I personally am of the opinion, keep it there.
You can't rob people of the Lady Gaga Star is Born. So.
I do love that film. So I'm with you on that one. I want to now talk about LGBTQ cinema. Let's talk about something which is a very hot conversation, and that is straight actors playing gay roles.
Yes.
Yeah, the thought is straight actors shouldn't play gay roles. Now, I'm not entirely sure what my opinion on that is, but I'd be interested to know what yours is.
Yeah, I think it's really complex. I think that at Cecil, we have people who are straight and out in the world have played queer characters or gay characters. And then we have had queer people playing queer characters. And we have had queer people playing straight characters. And I think for me, my big obsession is we keep on finding the best people for the role, but there's a very particular aspect of the film business, which is assumed audience for an actor. Like who's going to go see that film or who's going to switch onto that TV show because they like that actor and they've seen that actor in something else that they really like and they've got a connection to that person's body of work. So I'm obsessed with that we build up queer actors so that they are seen by so many audiences that when those actors go for queer roles, that it's a no-brainer for those actors. That people are so excited that those actors are in a film or TV show, full stop, whatever the character's sexuality is. So for me, and I know there's been some discourse about will James Bond ever be gay? My obsession is that the actor, I would love to see a day where the actor playing James Bond is an out gay person, because that means that actor in that context could then go and help support a queer film or a queer TV show, and that would get made because of that person's profile. Yeah, I guess what my concern is a little bit is that we keep on seeing those kind of amazing, take Andrew Scott, for example, incredible in All of Us Strangers, but also was amazing as the hot priest and got a lot of people, a lot of straight women were obsessed with him in that show, as well as gay guys. So I think, yeah, that would be my dream, is to see a out gay person playing James Bond. That would be pretty great.
Well, you, when I first met you, explained to me that it's kind of like the Jonathan Bailey effect.
Yeah.
In that, forgive me, I haven't seen Bridgerton, which is a crime because everybody apparently has seen it. Does he play a straight person in that?
He does.
And that launched his career as a face that your mum would fancy, or, you know, the 16-year-old would fancy. So I totally understand what you're saying in that if we can get the majority to love you as an actor and see you as a sex symbol, regardless of your sexuality, that when he migrates to fellow travelers or tells another story about queer people, those eyeballs will then turn to him naturally.
And that's how the system works. But I also agree that too often the right performer is also not getting the queer role. And so I think it's a balancing act. It's about understanding the system and making sure that queer actors have the choice of roles, whatever that might be. But they also get straight roles, because there was a time in, certainly in film history, where gay actors would not get straight roles because no one would believe that they would convince audiences that they were straight. I mean, that is hopefully gone. But I think that is, it's sort of understanding the system and honestly having queer people have giving queer people the opportunity to have the choice of roles that, you know, straight people have had for decades.
Still kind of on this subject, I'm interested to know about straight actors and the fear of playing gay roles that I think might have been slightly, like 10 years ago. I'm not sure that would be the case now. Like Daniel Craig, I'm sure would, and he has this year. I think he's in a film where he's playing a gay man.
Yeah.
I guess the question is, do you think there has been a shift in that? So say Tom Cruise 20 years ago probably wouldn't have wanted to play a gay person on screen for fear it would dent his career.
Yeah.
Whereas these days, I think that's a lot more acceptable.
Yeah, and it wins people Oscars. I think there's probably less concern. There's probably maybe a little bit concern, maybe if someone is not out and they therefore don't want to play a gay character for fear that there would be some sort of conversation around their sexuality. But I don't really feel, I think that acting it's complicated because acting is really about embodying someone different and playing something different and finding an authenticity within that, from a place that you're not that person necessarily. So I think that I can see for straight actors that there's a wonderful challenge in that, because that isn't their sexuality, but to go and experience and be somebody else is truly what acting is. So I can understand the pull from actors to want to play gay roles, actually, more than I understand the reluctance to play them.
And now that we're talking about this, I'm just thinking, I actually think it's, from my perspective as a gay man, if I watched a straight actor playing a gay role and being so comfortable on screen, having sex scenes, you know, I would be like, that's kind of cool. And I think that's in some way making me feel more accepted that they're comfortable with that.
Yeah.
I think there's a sort of that can also have an effect on gay audiences.
And also there's a whole history of us, there's a whole industry around falling in love with actors and being fans of actors and wanting actors to be close to us in terms of the stories they're telling and to represent maybe something that we've experienced in our lives and we see it mirrored on screen. So I think there is also a world where people are incredibly excited that Paul Mescal's playing gay men in particular roles, because people have watched normal people and gone, wow, imagine if that character or that actor was gay in a film. So I think think it's very, very complex. It's evolving. It will change. There'll be views now that in 10 years will be completely different. But I think the shift and the conversation and the dialogue are happening, and changes are being made, and I think that's a good thing. But I do believe that there have been not enough queer actors getting enough queer roles, and not enough queer actors getting enough straight roles for quite a long time. And I think that's shifting, and I think that is the most important change that's happened over the years. And I think also there's been such a strong online presence of discourse that I think that has made the people at the top really think about it, whereas I don't think they thought about it much before.
I wanted to now move on to Heartstopper. So this has been such a big success. So can you talk us through your involvement and how this kind of became a Seesaw production?
Yeah, so Emil and I, it's our company, and Patrick Walters, who works with us, is an executive producer in television. He's got his own label at the company called Fanboy. And before that label was set up, he would be looking for projects, and the graphic novel of Heartstopper came into the company and came to him, and he immediately connected with it, saw himself in Charlie, and then there is a process where Alice, the graphic novelist, would go around different companies, and you would try and put to her why your company would be the best company to adapt the material. And she came into Seesaw. I wasn't in the room at the time, and Patrick had done a little slideshow of sort of imagery of things he felt that were very sort of Heartstopper adjacent, and how the production might look in tone and feel. And at just the end of it, he had himself in his school uniform at the end, and I think everyone started crying in that meeting. And then Alice chose to go with Patrick and with Cecil to adapt the graphic novels. But the burden of representation is so massive, I think, with queer material, that, I mean, Looking is a Andrew Haig's wonderful show that just had the burden of representation on it. And it's just amazing, a bit like Girls in a way, that people are finding Looking, or going back to Looking and going, wow, why was this show, ever why did it ever come to an end? Why wasn't there more series? But it just had the weight of representation. It was meant to represent every single sort of essentially gay man at that period. And then if you're not representing it, every single gay man, there's going to be a lot of gay people who don't like the show. So the burden of representation is massive. And so we were, and it's lessened as there's more material, I think. But with Heartstopper, we were worried about that. It's high school. Are we quietly going to be, and it's to Netflix credit, were we quietly going to be something sexy on the development slate, but not something ever that was going to be put into production? And so I was worried that Heartstopper was going to be not getting that support in the end, but Netflix really believed in it. And then we made the first series in Slough, without anyone really having any huge expectations in terms of what it would become. And then it just took off in such a magical way. And it's really, as I've moved away from producing day to day to run the company, it's so special when you see that you've created, I hope, a safe space for new people to come into the company to make work like Heartstopper. That's pretty special.
And the casting of it, that must have been integral to the success. I mean, like the actors that you've got are all great and very appropriate.
Yeah, it was scary as well, because we wanted, you're dealing with child actors.
Were they all under 18?
They were all really young. And I can't remember what everyone's exact ages were, but they would have been. And you just hope that, because there's such a specific graphic novel representation as well, there's even more pressure. Because normally you can, how many films have you seen where suddenly at the end of the film they show a picture of the real life person, you're like, they look nothing like Nicole Kidman, they look nothing like, but with this we had to find the right people, and we did. And that was because it was an open casting. The stars aligned that those kids represented in the Heartstopper graphic novels are there in the world, and they're in schools, and we were able to just, send up a flare, and they found us.
So can you talk a little bit more about, because they're LGBT roles, you said that you don't actually ask these actors because they're children, I don't know if that's the right word, under 18, what their sexuality is, like whether they're trans or not, whether they're non-binary, that, which I actually find quite interesting, because I would assumed that would be part of the casting process.
I think with those graphic novels, people are feeling connected to those characters. They are going to probably want to show up to those auditions.
Yeah.
So whereas you cannot ask people what their sexuality is at any age, in that sense, that's people's private lives. But I think that you hope you're going to cast the right people for the role. You hope that there's going to be some element of connectivity between somebody's love for that graphic novel and belief that they can play that role, and why you're going to be convinced that they're the right people for the role. So you just, and sometimes it can come through in a very organic, natural way, where, because there's always conversations with people before the tape starts, where they talk, or they introduce themselves on a self-tape, and they talk about their lives a little bit. So there's people who, if they want to be generous with information, they can, but we don't expect it. And we're just looking for people who connect with those characters.
I suppose there's always a concern from a filmmaker's perspective, not talking about Heartstopper, but just any film that you cast a person in a queer role, is that their life outside of that reflects the values of the filmmaker, the story that you're telling, but also the queer person who's being represented. Because if you put someone in a position where they're then going to be interviewed a lot about what was it like to play, a gay person in the war or something, you hope that they come up with like an answer which is genuine based on their own values.
I mean, on the flip side, Kit felt compelled to go onto Twitter, I think, to talk about his sexuality, and that was a sort of, I think, a bit of a sort of dark moment for the general need for everybody to know everything about everybody. I think a little bit, and I think he should have been allowed to not feel like he had to say anything.
What did he say?
Well, he felt compelled to sort of come out and say he was bi, and because everybody was sort of obsessing with him and his sexuality, and I don't think that, I think we should be moving to a place where we're not making people feel compelled to give that very personal information out to the world as a right. For everybody to know. That's sort of the opposite of, I think, how we want people to find their sexuality, honestly.
A lot for these kids to also take on is that unexpected like public reaction that they probably weren't considering.
Huge. Everyone hoped the Heartstopper was going to be a success, but nobody, I don't think anybody probably thought that it would take off in the way that it has.
So I wish I had Heartstopper when I was young. I'm not jealous, I'm happy for them, but like this, let me reminisce. The storylines that I had when I was growing up, mine were Hollyoaks, where Jean-Paul was necking off with that guy, Craig, in secret, terrified in the changing rooms. Lots of HIV storylines, lots of like shame, lots of secret love affairs. So my my representation of gay people on TV was all to do with keeping it underground, and it's very secretive and something that you shouldn't talk about. So Heartstopper is not that, and it must be incredible for young people to be able to see queer storylines in such a refreshing, normal light.
Yeah, it's a lot of people, you're not the first person to say that. Like, most emails I had when the first show came out was, I wish I'd had this when I was a kid. I wish I had this when I was a kid. And I wish I'd had it when I was a kid. I think that we're now closer to a time than when I was growing up, where actually the reality of those queer kids' lives in Heartstopper are still, for many people, the dream scenario of what it could be like to a certain extent. And even though they're going through tough problems, I still feel like there is a there is a magic acceptance within the context of I don't know, their friendship group in the school. That life isn't perfect for them, and there's still challenges, and there's still bullies and all that sort of stuff. But it's definitely a version of reality that I think that some people still don't experience in a way.
Yeah, for
but
sure.
I think it shows us all that it can be what we're achieving or looking to achieve. So I think that with the show, I think it's sort of near to, it is some people's realities, and it can be people's realities, and they're still grappling with things that are very real and bullying. But I think that it offers such a more hopeful representation that I certainly had growing up, and then also my reality in school. I think going back to the Oscars, I had such a tough time with sports, unsurprisingly, and I when we won the Oscar for the King's Speech, my school called me up in Bristol and said, "Would you come back and do an assembly?" And I said no, because I hate public speaking, which was what the film was about. I said I don't really want to do it. Plus, like, the trauma of the idea of going in and talking to a lot of kids who probably didn't care. So I said, if you could pick the kids that you think are probably going to sort of head into the arts, or show that they have some interest in film or television. And I went back, and there's this, and it was really amazing, and everyone asked really sensible questions. And then I took the Oscar, and everyone obviously wanted to hold the Oscar and have a photo. And I said, there is this sort of belief that if you hold an Oscar, you will not win one. And a lot of people in that classroom sort of said, I don't care, I'm just going to take a photo of the Oscar. But there was one girl who said, I'm not touching it. I'm not going to touch that Oscar. And I was like, you are the coolest person I've ever met. Like, I love it. But after that, they said, come into the teacher's room or whatever, and meet some of the teachers that you used to have at school that are still there. And I went in, and my old sports teacher was there, and he said, well, lucky you won that, because you're never going to win anything for sport. And I went, and I just couldn't believe I was thrown straight back into being like the little kid that sort of didn't have an agency and was sort of struggling and trying to find his way through. So hopefully the Heartstopper universe, it's all okay, and they're good at rugby, so it's fine.
Did you tell him where to go with this teacher?
No, I didn't know. It was one of those examples where I became 14 years old again.
Yeah. To your point on Heartstopper not being everyone's reality, and let's face it, probably the majority of gay kids' reality isn't that world. But by creating that world, you could say that the hope is there that life will imitate art, and young people watching that will see it and take that back into their school experience.
Totally. And that's exactly what people have been doing. And actually, that younger people are reading those graphic novels and watching the show, and then starting school, and then going in with that reality being the norm, I think is really super important. I think that I remember when we did the read through, in just before the production of the first series, I said to Alice, because I'm 45, and she's been writing the graphic novels from her perspective of being younger, and I said, is it like this, Alice? And she said, it is, and it's definitely getting more like this for lots more people. And I think the show can hopefully act as a form of, like, it can be a bit of a loop and kind of help kids who sort of read it as a graphic novel start school and kind of experience that as Heartstopper being the norm rather than being the the anomaly.
So what did you have growing up in terms of like gay representation on screen? Do you remember secretly watching Queer as Folk, or like, was there anything that you
Queer
remember?
as Folk was a thing, but it was mostly sad. It was mostly sad representations. So it's nice with Heartstopper to put a bit of consistent joy in the world.
Going back to films and gay cinema, in your opinion, what gay films do you think really were kind of industry shaking So to give you an example, I remember seeing Brokeback Mountain and being like, A, terrified because my dad was sat next to me and I wasn't out. So when they were having sex in the tent, I was like creasing with embarrassment.
Okay, who chose that particular
I don't know.
screening?
I don't know. I was 16, so I think I got in as well underage because I think it's maybe I was 15 and it was a 16. But I think we were just like, yeah, Heath Ledger, new film. Very awkward to sit through when you're not out with your father.
So you discovered what Brokeback Mountain was while being with your dad.
Yeah.
Those are tough moments for kids growing up, isn't it? It's the moment they're even the most. I've got great parents, but even the moments that they would never have clocked, where they react to sort of laugh at a joke or something or thing.
Yeah.
It just so gets ingrained.
And we're so hypersensitive to it,
So
aren't we?
hypersensitive. Yeah. So hypersensitive. But no, Brokeback Mountain was a huge one. I was working at that point, so I remember everybody talking about it, and it was actually a really big buzzy. And at that time, it was two very exciting actors playing gay roles, so that was really fantastic. Other big examples, I think Andrew Haig's work has been massively important. We've been lucky enough to make a TV show with him. I think his stuff's been brilliant. But I think, straight director Stephen Frears directed Prick Up Your Ears and directed My Beautiful Laundrette, which I think were super important films that talk about gay characters and talk about diverse relationships. There's been some real gems, and now there's a real explosion.
A question in terms of like filmmakers making queer cinema. Do you think that a lot of it is we have to give audiences something rather than what they're telling us they want? So if you're writing a film, you're like, this is an important story to tell. It's not that people are like desperately asking for it. It's that we're going to give it to you anyway. Do you know what I mean? Are you led by audiences or do you lead audiences?
That's a good question. I think that you've just got to tell the story in the best way to connect with the audience that you're aiming to connect with. So that might be, if you're making a film at a certain budget level, then at that lower budget level, you've got more opportunity, I guess, to see a success in a smaller group of people connecting with that particular story. As you're requiring more and more money, the more there is a sort of weight on delivering for a bigger audience.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably the maths equation. It's why huge blockbusters have to hit 4 quadrants in that sense, because they cost so much money. So I think the tricky thing is to make sure that there is opportunities for younger filmmakers coming through who want to push boundaries, who want to say something different, that want to be kind of moving conversations on, that you actually can make work at a lower budget level and be the little thing that surprises everybody.
My final question for you is, what are your hopes in terms of queer representation and storytelling for the next century of cinema? or and TV? Where do you hope things move to and shift and keep growing?
I just think that just to be surprised by fantastic stories. In the end, a great story about great characters where an audience connects with it is like the best thing. We all go home to maybe switch off and watch some television, or we go to the cinema to experience a film. And I think that so often a lot of stories are not told, and there is just more opportunity now to tell those stories and take risks. And I think that is exciting, and I'm excited to play a part of it. And I'm excited that there's a whole group of people in my company who are making projects that they're passionate about on their own slates, and their ideas and thoughts that I never would have come up with.
Mm.
And it's from their point of view or their friends or what they're keen to see on television or in film. And I think that evolution of storytelling is fantastic. And then you can be surprised by something that something like White Lotus, for example, which has got such different representation in it, and everyone loves it.
Yeah.
So I think it's I'm always excited about and the industry we're very lucky to have access to very particular, like Lion is a good example, to have an opportunity to sit down with the real people that this actually happened to, and then take it upon ourselves to do the best job in order to tell their story on screen is a real privilege and an honor. So yeah, I mean, I'm excited because I'm someone who watches film and TV, and when you watch something fantastic, you're like, oh my God, why isn't there more of this?
Amazing. All right, well, Iain, thank you so much.
Thank you.